It's a blazing summer afternoon, the kind where the heat presses down like a heavy blanket and the air vibrates with cicadas, and I'm sitting on my porch finally enjoying a cold drink after weeks of non-stop work. But then, without warning, the lights flicker, the fans sputter, and suddenly my entire house goes dark, the air conditioning shuts off, and I'm left in the stifling silence of a power outage that doesn't make sense. Because I know I've paid every bill on time and, more importantly, I know my house runs almost entirely on the solar farm I built with my own hands, panels stretching across my property like shining shields soaking up the sun, not only powering my home but producing so much extra energy that I've been feeding electricity back into the city grid for years, saving neighbors during blackouts, reducing reliance on fossil fuels, and even earning monthly credits from the utility company. So when my power cuts off, I immediately know something's wrong, and as I step outside, confused, I see her, Karen, the self-appointed queen of the HOA, arms crossed, smug smile plastered across her face, clipboard clutched like a weapon, and in that moment the puzzle pieces click together. Because she's been complaining for months that my panels are an eyesore, that they ruin the uniform aesthetic of the neighborhood, that they make her house look less valuable. Even though my solar setup has been featured in local news and praised by environmental groups, but none of that matters to Karen because her universe revolves around control, and she just couldn't resist taking matters into her own hands, so she convinced a couple of board members to vote on a secret bylaw amendment banning unapproved exterior modifications. And then, drunk on her new rule, she called in a private contractor to physically cut my connection to the grid without a single legal notice or warning. And the worst part is she did it with this smug confidence, probably imagining me sweating inside my powerless house, regretting ever defying her. But what she didn't realize is that by cutting me off, she didn't just flip a switch on my home, she disconnected an entire section of the city grid that my solar farm was actively supporting, a section that powered dozens of homes, streetlights, and even part of a nearby hospital's backup system. So while she was celebrating her petty victory, the neighborhood started unraveling within minutes, freezers shutting down, residents pouring into the streets angry and confused. And then the sirens began, because the hospital emergency wing that had been drawing from my surplus suddenly lost the critical feed, forcing their backup generators to kick in, straining under the demand. And within 20 minutes city engineers were scrambling to figure out why their monitoring system showed a sudden drop in supply from one of their most stable solar contributors. And as angry neighbors began pointing fingers, someone mentioned they'd seen Karen and her contractor fiddling with the utility box earlier, and that was all it took, because when the city officials arrived with police escorts, the trail led directly back to her, standing in her driveway with that same smug smile, until she realized that instead of being thanked for restoring order, she was being confronted with a barrage of questions about why she had interfered with critical infrastructure, and her face strained of color, as the police explained that tampering with a licensed energy provider, even a private one like mine, was not just an HOA matter, it was a state and federal offense, punishable by fines and even jail time, because I wasn't just powering my house, I was contracted as an official micro-supplier for the grid, meaning my property was legally protected under energy laws she clearly hadn't bothered to read. And as the realization sank in, the neighbors turned on her, people who had tolerated her nitpicking about lawn lengths and mailbox colors were now shouting about spoiled groceries, ruined family dinners, and the chaos her son had caused. And for the first time, Karen had no snappy comeback, no rulebook to hide behind, no audience applauding her tyranny, just a crowd of furious residents and a set of officers treating her not like a neighborhood queen but like a criminal. And as the contractor she hired started panicking too, trying to explain that she claimed to have the authority, the officers calmly informed him that ignorance was no excuse, and that he could also be held accountable for tampering with protected infrastructure. And meanwhile the city engineers asked me to temporarily reroute my system manually so they could stabilize the grid, which I did with a few keystrokes on my monitoring tablet, instantly restoring power to the entire block, lights flickering back on like a wave of karma crashing down, neighbors cheering, and me standing there in the glow of returning electricity while Karen shrank smaller and smaller in the shadows, and as reporters arrived to cover the Mystery blackout. The story shifted quickly from outrage to outrage, with cameras catching the perfect shot of Karen's horrified expression as she realized she not only failed to humiliate me, she had exposed herself on a citywide stage. Her name soon plastered across headlines about HOA gone wrong, and local woman interferes with hospital power supply. And while I didn't relish her downfall, I couldn't deny the poetic justice, because her obsession with control had blinded her to the bigger picture, that the very panels she hated were the reason her house stayed cool in the summer, the reason her streetlights glowed at night, the reason her community thrived while others suffered rolling blackouts. And as the legal process unfolded, she faced not just HOA embarrassment but real legal consequences. While I received an outpouring of thanks from the city for my quick response and continued contribution, and in the end, the ultimate irony is this: the HOA that tried to shut me down ended up forced by law to not only reinstate my solar farm but officially register it as critical community infrastructure, meaning that from that day forward, Karen couldn't lift a finger against it, couldn't file a complaint, couldn't so much as sneeze in its direction without risking massive fines. And while she sulked behind closed blinds, I expanded my farm even further, doubling capacity, turning what she saw as a nuisance into the backbone of the neighborhood. And every time I see the panels gleaming in the sun, I remember that moment of silence when the lights came back on, when the neighbors cheered, when Karen finally realized her reign of petty control was over, and I smile. Because in the end, she didn't just cut my power, she handed me the most powerful victory I could ever imagine.